So I'm continuing my project of make myself a shirt. Now that I've fitted that undershirt, pretty happy with it, adjusted the pattern, etc. I'm going to make it out of fabric that I actually love, which is this imitation kente. So I'm just going to go through the pattern pieces quickly. This is the front, nothing too exciting. Over here on the front, I've got my center front, and then beyond that, it's 1.5 centimeters for the overlap. And then from there, my measurement is 6 centimeters. This is just what works for me because on the one side, I do 2, 2, 2, which gives you 6. And on the other side, I do 3, 3, again, gives you 6. It's just easy for me, so that's how I do. Here, I just kind of draw it out like an insane person because when I fold this back, I don't want to have a situation where it doesn't exactly match here. So I just draw it out like an insane person. I fold it back and I'll trim that. No, nothing too exciting about that. Obviously, of course, any piece that I've not cut together, I'll just check for symmetry if I've cut the two pieces separately. And here on the shoulder, you see I've now put a seam down the middle of the yoke. And this yoke, so I line it up on the weft, on the wall, so that there's no stretch here on my shoulder, but that across the back, I've got some stretch there. That's that. Sleeves, nothing too exciting. I do want to fit this before I finish up. And here I haven't cut in my placket yet because if I have to narrow this, I want my placket to be exactly at 1/4. So I'll adjust that. And my back, here's my darts, and you'll see I only do one line of the dart, I only do the center and one leg, because then I'll just fold on the center and stitch down one leg. I really don't feel it's worth my time to try and match those two legs like an insane person. So I'm going to be doing that. I think last thing, seam allowances here from the back to the yoke to the front shoulder, it's all 1 centimeter. Depending on how I've done the fitting process, because in this case I know that this fits, so I'm only doing 1 centimeter seam allowance. If I'm still needing to fit, then here I'll maybe do 1.5 or 2, so that it's easy to adjust. But at the moment, this is all 1 centimeter. Here on the shoulders is 1.5, neck is 1 centimeter. Again, if I was still fitting, I would do 1.5, but I've already fitted this with the chemise. Shoulder 1.5, and then side seams all the way down. So of course, that sleeve is also 1.5 here, and that's going to get trimmed with the false seam. And then the sides, all of this is 2 centimeters, and again, it'll be trimmed with the false seam. But that 2 centimeters allows me enough adjustment. This sleeve, I've got 2 centimeters at the bottom here for my seam allowance. Again, because of the adjustment situation, I still want to fit the sleeve and decide, is it fashion? So those are all the pieces, nothing too revolutionary there. What I'm going to do is, usually I do things kind of all together because it saves me time up and down from the machine. But, here I just do it step by step. So I'm going to do my darts, and I'm going to join these yolks together and open them up. That's what is going to occur at this time. And back from the sewing machine and the iron and all of that. Here you can see I've joined the yolks, there they are, and here's that little bit of stretch over the shoulder, but on the over the shoulder blades, but on the shoulder, no stretch because this is on the wall. And I always put my label before I sew the rest of the garment, because otherwise here on the outside, you're going to be seeing stitching here, which is what? Trash! I also, at the same time, ironed up my fronts. So here you can see how my numbers work. This is now the edge, which is 1.5 centimeters forward from the center front. So I've got a 1.5 centimeter overlap from the center front. And then from that point, I add 6 centimeters. So here on the buttonhole side, it's going to be 3 centimeters, 3 centimeters, gives me 6. And here, each fabric is a little bit different. Usually I'll put some fusing here, which is just going to help the button holes not to fray so much. If it's a very soft fabric, I'll put a little bit of fusing right on the edge here to just give me that crisp line. You know, this, it's quite a dense cotton, so it's giving me a very beautiful crisp line there. This, you know, some people don't stitch this down because then, you know, obviously you'll have here on the front the stitch line. I really don't like that. I find with the washing and the wearing of it that you know, these edges then tend to kind of curl up and it's quite untidy. So I always stitch this down. I'm feeling a bit opulent today, so I'm going to be doing that by hand, just for funsies. And then here, my button portion, same story. It's 1.5 centimeters past the center front, plus 6 centimeters, and this one I iron 2, 2, 2, giving me 6. And again, I always stitch it down. And again, opulence has caught me today, so I'll be doing that by hand. So I'm going to stitch those down. My yokes are done, and here is my back. Here I've sewn in my darts. I don't really think, you know, unless you are going to stitch this down in some way, that it really is, you know, important which way you iron them. Because at the end of the day, you know, nothing's holding them back. So, you know, like they're just going to be flapping around any which way they feel. So I iron them towards the center back. That's just me. I think as long as you do it symmetrically, it's really not a problem. And yeah, you know, if you are going to be stitching it down, then personally I would iron it towards the center back, but that's just me. So, okay, from there, obviously hand stitching on the fronts. This back, do I have a notch on the center? I don't, like an insane person. But I did mark that. Let me just see. I don't have my scissors. It's a bit of a crazy day today, working on a Sunday. Imagine breaking the law. But so yeah, like when we say everything is a little bit all over the place, actually that's every day. What am I talking about? So there's my center, and I'm just matching up my center with my stitch line. What you can also do with these yokes is just with a ruler check that this line is actually straight, because sometimes, you know, with sewing, all of that can be a little bit skew. And this center seam here does actually give you an opportunity to shape a little bit of this if a guy has a very stooped neck. I would only do it in extreme cases. For the average gent, it's better to just keep that straight. But yeah, you know, extreme cases are extreme. Then you can create some shape there to better accommodate the neck. So I'm going to start with right side to right side here. Nothing too exciting. You know my deep and insatiable love of pinning. Just going to do all of that, pin all of that. And then I'll pin the inside yoke. Kind of like a sandwich is how we used to call it. You know, right side to wrong side. So you're doing the 2 breads, which are your 2 yolks, and the polony, which is your back piece. And you're just sandwiching that together. And of course, the butter must be on the correct side. So butter must be facing polony, butter must be facing polony. This is how we used to talk back in the day. So anyway, I'm just going to continue with that. And you know, this again, I'll sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and I'll do that by hand. Finishing plow. So I'm kind of right at the end of stitching up my fronts, and as you can see, I'm doing a prick stitch And because I don't want to spend all my life here and I don't want so many stitches, I'm kind of traveling my thread through all these folds and then stitching up there. Just a few things on this. Um, that's now the music channel I listen to has some ads. Don't mind that. So, moving through here, this button, where the buttons are going to be, I don't put fusing there because I've turned this now 3 times. So I feel it's enough for stability. The other thing is that, as we spoke, when I cut this, here, this shape I just willy-nilly made kind of a fun little rectangle, little triangle there. And as you can see, it's folded back into this interesting kind of shape. I don't want to put another um, thread in here. So I'm actually going to finish off here. This fabric is so tightly woven that it's been a little bit of a challenge to work. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. So um, you can see this little portion here at the top is, there we go. Oh, of course, yeah. There we go. Is kind of a crazy little shape there. So all I'm going to do, first I need to knock this off. And this. So this will of course be caught in the seam lines of my neck there. What I'm going to do there is just now cut this off. So, this is the kind of thing that is just not feasible unless you're doing bespoke. The amount of hours you'd be losing in your production process if you're manufacturing. So anyway, I love hand stitching. I just love doing that. So I'm feeling opulent. I'm going to do that. Now here, I really like to do my buttons and buttonholes before I join everything because it's just easy to work on, a piece like this. So my buttons, the measurements, it's like this. So you start with the buttonholes. My kop raas so bietjie. That's just how I roll. So yes, we're going to start here 7, and then from there we're going to do every 9 centimeters. So this first one here is usually closer to the neck because if our first one was down here, you kind of expose a lot of your chest here if you didn't do up your top button. And a lot of people these days don't wear a tie. So they do only this top button, and then you want this still to be reasonably closed here. You don't want to be flashing about like a gigolo. So I'm just measuring that 18, 20, 26, 27, 27. Ooh. You can see it's a Sunday. And now here at the bottom, I'm going to kind of gauge how I feel. 9, it's a little bit low because, here I want about 1.5 centimeter turn up. If I do 9 centimeters, not too bad, but I am actually going to make this a little bit shorter and just do this last buttonhole at 8 centimeters. Now, just the way that my machines work, this mark that I've given is the top of the buttonhole. In other words, my buttonhole, there's the top. Here's my 1.5. That's perfectly in this white line, which is fantastic. It's about 1.5 centimeters long. So there's my buttonhole like that. So this marks the top of the buttonhole. And just like again with my machinery, I need to just have that top line extended a little bit so I can see where it is. So I'm just going to do that on all of these because my my buttonhole foot needs this line needs to know, and it's going to do the buttonhole like that. So it needs to know where this stops. So I'm just doing that. Okay, and then this last button traditionally is horizontal. So all these are vertical. This one traditionally is horizontal. So this one, I'm going to just draw that line straight out. And I'm going to know that I have to do this one horizontally. Between you and me, to be honest, knowing how long this shirt is on me, yeah, so you always have to kind of gamble and decide what's going to work for your client. because I don't know if I want my last buttonhole here, and then all of this is flapping about in the wind. But this is quite a long shirt. So yeah, actually between you and me, we're going to change our mind there. Marking 9, and this last one is going to be a horizontal button. So this one, I want to measure 1.5 to the end there, and I'll just use this. My machine will decide how big to make that a 1.5, because I know that this line is now the back of my buttonhole. Hope this is all making sense. Sometimes I confuse myself. So let's go back to the buttons. Now, there's a lot of different opinions out there of button placement. Personally, I just do my button not in the middle of the buttonhole, kind of, let's say, 2/3 to the top. So when I measure it here, I measure 7.5, because that's put me not quite in the middle, just a little bit to the top. So I'm not at the top, because that tends to kind of move your front piece a little bit skewed. So a little bit down from the top. But now, if I've measured this 7.5, the rest is all going to fall in line if I just carry on with a 9. Now, in this case, let me just do this, because I can't do even this basic maths and talk at the same time. So, yeah, and then we're going to do that as the last one. Now, I can always check it against here that everything is actually lining up. I haven't been chit-chatting too much and then getting my numbers skewed. So you can see all of these are going to be a little bit, not right at the top of the buttonhole, a little bit further down, but then you see this button must change. So either I'm going to make this button at 8.5 so that it's now in line with this horizontal buttonhole, because this one must be exactly in line, because it's not a vertical, so the button can't jam around in there or jive around in there. It needs to be quite perfect. In this case, I'm actually going to move this buttonhole by 0.5 centimeters. This is actually going to be 9.5. Just because I don't want to actually make it shorter because of this extreme length over here. So each one is a little bit different. You have to kind of gauge what's going to happen. But at the end of the day, what I do and what I think is correct personally is, like I say, the button is then a little bit down from the top of the buttonhole, and the last button is horizontal and matches exact. So now with the buttons, I'm just going to mark at 1.5 from the edge of the garment, because that's my 1.5 centimeter overlap. That will be done by hand. This is all going to be done by machine. And we already sewed that up. And because the opulence has just taken a hold of me, I'm going to be just doing a little prick stitch along there. Same story. I'm not going to do them so close together. I'm going to stitch, travel, stitch, travel, stitch, travel, like this. And there's my label, not shining through on the side like a trash person. Buttonholes have been buttonholed. Buttons are almost done. I want to put this last one on. I do have an entirely separate video on hand done buttonholes with a shank, hand done buttons with a shank. But I'll just do this one quickly. I'm just going to do a single knot there at the end. You can see I've got 4 threads on this needle. And I'm going to be going right in the center of my button, coming out diagonally. Now this fabric is phenomenally densely woven, and it has a little bit of elastine, giving it a bit of a stretch. So it really just loves hugging the needle. It is so, my hands actually can't pull it through the fabric with such a thick thread at the back. So this is where tools are coming in handy. So yeah, stitching diagonally across the button, and then on the fabric, on the shirt, stitching horizontally, leaving a little bit of space between the shirt and the button, diagonal again across the top. Now you'll see on my other video, I go again to really make this a very strong button, but because of the stitching situation, I'm just going straight to my fraps, doing a little knot there, knotting that off, passing back. And then right here, see I've got those 2 horizontal lines, And I'm just going to kind of catch those two around my needle twice, knot that off, and then in a way do kind of back tack just under all this knotty part. And I always do 3, 1, 2. Ooh, question, wow, that's not fashion. 2, 3. See, by now it's very dense, so it will really not just unravel there. Okay, so that's that. What I will do before I carry on from here is check that these do actually line up. There's no funny bubbles somewhere. So I'll check it now while it's still flat. It's a lot easier to spot a problem now. And you'll see with my buttonholes, I've just cut them open, and all of this fray I'm leaving in there for now. I'm going to be buttoning and unbuttoning, buttoning and unbuttoning throughout this process, and that will end up kind of, teasing all of that fray loose. And then right at the end, I'll just cut it all off. So for now, just buttoning these all up. Checking, here it's easy if you spot a problem here, easy to fix. And you see, here's my last button, horizontal, and I also do a keyhole here because, I have the machine and I like to do it, and it's a little bit unique. So you see, this is all lying nice and flat. You will very quickly see if you've, done a small area here, and with it flat, easy to spot, easy to match this exactly. You don't have to struggle from there. And like I said, my numbers, it's 7 centimeters from the top, and that includes the seam allowance. So once I put this collar in, it'll actually be 6 centimeters from the collar. And then from there, 9 centimeters. That's just my measurement. So with that done, we've also done the prick stitching here along the yoke, because opulence. I'm going to put my shirt like that. Now we've already done this on the fitting. So all we could do, right sides together, we take one yoke, flip it under, and I find some pins. Found the pins, and stitching my shoulders. And like I discussed with the chemise, the actual rule is to sew shoulder point to neck point. But I really do not do that. So you see there, I'm unbuttoning that, and it's actually caught a little thread. So I'm just going to keep buttoning, unbuttoning, let all of this fray tease itself out. And then, right at the end, before I give this to a client, I will just trim all that down. But this buttoning and unbuttoning process helps to tease all of that out. I wouldn't want to give this to a client and it looks fantastic, and then, they wear it a little bit, they wash it a little bit, and then next thing you see this nonsense. I mean, for especially the price we charge, there's no chance we can let the client experience that. So, okay, line that all flat, ring this all up, and then rolling it, rolling. The other yoke will then come up, and we're just going to stitch that. So yeah, here again, 1 centimeter seam allowance. But what I wanted to say as well with the yoke, I did put that prick stitch there as like a decorative and also, stabilizing stitch. But if, if this was now for a client and I was kind of in the middle of the fitting process, I wouldn't have put that stitch there now because, I might want to change something, and then I don't want to have to unpick my handwork there and then redo it. Know how much therapy that would cost me. Because it's myself, to be honest, I know there's just zero chance that I'm going to be unpicking the yoke, because also I have fitted this already, and I also know with myself, if there is a drama there, I'm just going to look the other way. But that's between you and me. Again, we did this on the chemise. Let's just look. Okay, it's about 18 divided by 3. It's 6. Then I'm going to stitch 1.5. Here I'll be back to 1 and 1, and I can kind of straighten that out. So these pens, Always double check what is their effect on the 18 minus 6 is 12 on the fabric before you go around putting your pen marks all over them. Especially with a polyester, you will find that it leaves like a white mark, and because this has a bit of elastine, we have that white mark. So I'm using it now because on the inside, no one will know, but always double check that. So I'm going to go ahead, stitch that, drop them on, and then what I'll do is I'll just do a stabilizing stitch around the armhole and around the neck. The body done, and what I'm going to do now is join the sleeves, which is a bit of an exploration. You need to see how does this sleeve join in. Before I do that, I just want to check that this is actually nice and smooth. See, I've got a little bit of a corner there. Really not much, but there goes my thimble. But I'm just going to trim that down just ever so slightly. And here as well, just going to trim that down. This is just kind of the variations of cutting by hand. Now I've got my center mark there with a notch. I'm going to mark, join that notch. So like I say, each client is a little bit different how the process works, because it all depends on how well it fits or how much change I have to do for their body. So this portion of the crown of the sleeve, you don't want to gather, and this portion under the arm, we don't want any gathers. This is all the same as I did on the chemise. So you just check that out. The only thing that I'll do differently here is that I'm stitching 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. And now, if I was doing this for a client, I would stitch the 1.5 inch. See there, we've got some extra, which is exactly what we want. We'll start gathering from there. Just want to check it on this side and see how it's all coming together. So like I'm saying, if this was for a client, I would stitch this at 1.5, then just kind of stretch out those seams a little bit by iron and baste it to one side, and then the side seam all the way from the sleeve all the way down to the hem. Yeah, that's also, it's a nice amount together. I think that's actually going to be perfect. So, so this portion about there, I'm not going together. But, for myself, if I do need to adjust this pattern, I'll just adjust it after the fact and have it perfect for the next shirt. This is how it goes. Tailor's clothes are never as great as his clients. But, I do it with love. So anyway, in this case, I'm going to actually finish this off. See, that bubble's a little bit too much. Might not be matching exactly at the bottom here. So you've got to, it's, like I say, an exploration. You've got to find the balance. You don't really want to gather under the arm there, but I'm just giving a slight little smidge of a gather. And just making sure that everything is going to fit in neatly without giving me a pleat. So yeah, for myself, I'm going to actually stitch this sleeve, 1.5 centimeters, and then do the trim and the fell to complete it. And then I'll stitch my side body at 2 centimeters and then not complete that, but first fit it. So that I can, because that's quite a simple adjustment. I highly doubt I'm going to adjust anything there, but I do want to fit the, how's this bubble? The collar in the cuffs before, I actually want to do a sample one. before I carry on, because I don't have too much of this fabric to goof around with. And I'm also wanting to do a new type of collar that I haven't done before. So I just want to kind of, make sure all those measurements are correct, that my technique is fine. Okay, so yeah, there I've just done a bit of a gather. It does make sense that there should be a bit more gather on the back. Also remember, we extended the front, so here there's a bit less gather. And the back, we need that bit of stretch. So it makes sense. That maybe a little bit more than I would generally do, but that's fine. I'm going to stitch it with the sleeve on the underside. Pin the other side, stitch that, and then we'll do the fell seam. Iron, nothing too very exciting. I did want to show you, this portion here, you see how skew my seam was there. But, with the 1.5 centimeter seam allowance, no one's ever going to know. So this is what I like about a large seam allowance. You can, in a way, sew things straight. So here, again, exactly the same as how I did the chemise. No, that's not true. But I have somewhere before, I'm pretty sure, looked at doing a fell seam on a curve, especially a curve like this. So what I'm going to do, I'm just ironing that straight. Then I'm going to cut the body smaller. And I just measure with my eyes around half. So because my seam allowance is 1.5, this should be around 3/4 of a centimeter. And we just cut that all around. Cutting, cutting, cutting. As you know, I really like to work on the flat. See here my hand stitch knot. I'm not going to cut that off if I can avoid it. Just cut right on the outside of that. Working on the flat as much as I can. Cutting, cutting, cutting. Oh, yeah, I cut my knot. Bye. But fortunately, this is going to turn around and I'm sure that is going to be totally fine. Okay. More or less okay. All right, so then from there, depending on the fabric you're using, doing it on a block can be really useful. But I'm just stitching, ironing that up, and I don't want to iron past the stitch line. So I don't want to iron it so that, covers the stitch line, because that's then going to create more bulk. And if you are struggling with this to really get that, little piece, especially something this small, sometimes doesn't like to turn, likes to bounce in a way, especially if you're working on a polyester, then you can just work on a block. It's really going to help to fold the fabric over, and of course you can take your other wooden block and just squeeze it there. And especially just what you need to remember here, no steam, because we are on the wood. We don't want the wood to now end up expanding and growing, coming back to life all of a sudden. So I'm just going to carry on with that. I think you've just got a great view of my elbow there. Yeah, nothing too exciting. Stitching. Ironing, ironing, ironing. Story of my life. Just ironing, ironing. And then what we're going to do. Okay, so that's all ironed. Then what we're going to do on these curved portions, we're going to just stretch this out a little bit and curve it in the shape that I want it to be curved. Now this portion of the sleeve is on the bias, so it's going to curve out quite nicely. If you're struggling with it, you can just wet it a little bit, but really it's just to give it that shape that I want. It's going to make my life a little bit easier when I turn this around. There we go. And then kind of open that up. And there, getting the shape that I want on the body. So following that curve of the arm side around. Like such. And I'm just going to keep going all the way. This can get a little bit fiddly. And it can help doing the block because then you can kind of let that all fall off the block while you are working on this side. And yeah, so I'm just going to carry on ironing that. I don't think there's anything too exciting I can say here. And then I'll just go ahead, I'll stitch it from the wrong side, the side that we're working on now. And, I'll just keep my machine foot in line with that stitch line I've done. So even if the seam itself is a little bit not exactly on the line, my stitch must be straight so that on the right side, I'm just going to see one beautifully straight, fashionable stitch. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to go stitch that. Obviously, I'll do the other side, and then our sleeves will be done. As I was saying, if this was now for a client, I would have, taken that 1.5 centimeters, shifted it onto the body, and just hand basted it there. And then, depending on how I felt that day, either hand basted the sides, or I'd probably machine based with a long stitch and then push that seam allowance to the side and just baste it there. It's really dependent on what's happening with the client, how the fit is going, all of that. So because it's for myself, I can just make a few compromises. And now that the shoulder is done, this I'm just going to do a baste to fit it, and I'm going to do that by hand. No, I'm not going to do it by hand. I'm just going to do it. I could even do it by pins, to be honest. Maybe I should just do it by pins, to be honest. The reason I'm like this now is because big orders come in, so I have to jump onto that. And so this project is going to now just relax for a little bit. So yeah, I'm actually just going to pin this. I'll fit that, and I'm actually going to cut the video here. The collar and cuff situation I'm going to do in another video because I'm doing a new collar that I haven't done before. And usually how I'll do a temporary collar and cuff just to see how that's fitting, make sure that it's not choking anyone, and yeah, that's how it's going to go. So this one, because it's now for me, I'm just going to pin it along this 2 centimeter stitch line, and I'll just do a quick fit. I do think I'll have to adjust this sleeve. I think it's maybe a bit too baggy, but I'll see that now. So yeah, just going to do that, and then as soon as I get a chance, I'll carry on with the collars and cuffs, and we'll chat about that as we go. All right.